We're on top of Gimel Amud Aleph. We now begin the second Lishna. Till now we've been doing the Lishna Kama, the first Lishna, the first version, which began right after the Gemara, which began by saying, Sevarua. They thought to say that what does the word Mechitza mean in the Mishnah? It means a Gudal wall. And therefore, the Mishnah says that they Sheratzu Lasas Mechitza, they wanted to make a wall. That meant that they cannot compel each other to make a wall. They can only make a wall if they both want to. And that was according to the opinion that Lav Shmei Hezek, and therefore they can't compel each other unless they both want to. Ratzu Lasas Mechitza, Mechitza meaning a wall. Now the Gemara is going to say, and then the Gemara went on to say, well, maybe the other way, maybe back, and went back and forth in reading the Mishnah, and then raised all these objections to this Lishna, to this opinion of Lav Shmei Hezek, and all those questions limited the scope of Lav Shmei Hezek, or at least helped us define when and how you would say Lav Shmei Hezek and when you would say Hey Shmei Hezek. Now the Gemara is going to go with Lishna Achrina. So it's the top of the page, third word. Lishna Achrina. Another way of reading the Gemara. Amrila, it was said in the yeshiva, in the study hall, right? The Gemara is a conglomerate of conversation that took place in yeshivas. So Amrila, they said in the yeshiva, Sivarua, they thought to say, right, this is the Sivarua that Taisus was referring to in the first Taisus you learned, Sivarua there, where Taisus said that the fact that the Gemara introduces the first Lishna with Sivarua means that it's, meaning they thought to say, means because it's not the proper Lishna, and the real Lishna is the second Lishna, where Shmei Hezek. And even though this Lishna is also introduced with Sivarua, this one is only introduced with Sivarua because the first one is introduced with Sivarua, and not because it actually is a thought to say. It's actually a conclusion, right? This is what Taisus is referring to, if you remember what I'm talking about. Yeah? Okay, so Sivarua, they thought to say that my Mechitza, what's the meaning of the word Mechitza? Plukta, it means Plukta, division, dividing the property. So Sherotzu Lases Mechitza means that they wanted to make a part, they wanted to split the property. And therefore, once they want to split the property, then they can compel each other to build a wall because of Hezekriya Shmei Hezek. That's what the Gemara goes on to say. But first the Gemara brings the raya, the proof for that the word Mechitza can actually mean, Plukta can actually mean a division, rather than as it usually means a partition. So the Gemara quotes the pasuk, which the Gemara quoted earlier. The Ksiv, as the pasuk says, that Tehi Mechtzas Ha'eda, and it was part of the partition of the. It's talking about the way they divided the loot after some war, and the division of the loot was such and such, and the word for division there is Mechitza. So you see, the word Mechitza means Plukta, can mean division, not just partition. Now, Kivan Daratsu, because they wanted. What did they want? They wanted to make a Mechitza. And we just translated the word Mechitza to mean Plukta, to mean a division of property. So Kivan Daratsu, once they want to make a division of property, but in a they build the wall against their will. They can compel each other to build a wall. Alma, and this indicates that Hezekriya Shmei Hezek, that the Hezekriya is a Hezek. So we're familiar with this because we introduced this earlier, but the Gemara now is saying it officially. Beforehand, the Gemara is only saying it in the context of that this is not the way we were thinking, right? Before we were learning Lav Shmei Hezek, and anything we learned about Shmei Hezek was just in contrast. Now the Gemara is introducing the official way of reading the Gemara, of reading the Mishnah as Shmei Hezek. So even though we're familiar with this, the Gemara goes through it. But what's interesting, sorry?
Daf Gimel? Sorry, Daf Gimel?
Gimel Amud Aleph, yes.
Okay.
Now what's interesting is that even though this is somewhat repetition, right? The Gemara introduced these ideas before in the context of comparing it to the Lav Shmei Hezek version. We'll look at Rashi and we'll see little interesting differences. I don't necessarily have the explanation for this, and maybe we'll work through it as we get through this Gemara, but it's just interesting to point these out. So first of all, let's go to the Rashi, which says Kivan Daratsu. Right? So Kivan Daratsu, considering that they wanted to. And what did they want? They wanted to make Mechitza. And Mechitza we translated as Plukta, division. So Kivan Daratsu Lachloik, because they wanted to divide their property, therefore they have to build a wall against their will because Shmei Hezek, etc. And the Gemara is going to say, and Rashi says, the Kaman Parach, later the Gemara is going to ask, my Idaratsu, what do we care if they wanted? If the whole thing came down to the fact that they wanted to split, then what's the point? Afilu Leiratsu. sorry, my Yiratzu, why are we limiting the law of Shmei Hezek to the fact that they wanted to split? Even if they don't want to split, even if they don't mutual consent to split, they can compel each other to split, right? And that's when the Gemara is going to answer later, that it's talking about where there's less than 4 amos for each. But Rashi is telling us to hold on. The question is going to come later. Okay. Then Rashi says, so now that we're understanding that what they wanted to do is split the property, and because they wanted to split the property, now they're being compelled to build the wall because of Shmei Hezek. Says the Gemara, says Rashi, Banin Kaisel, what do they build? A wall, Shalavonim, of stone. What's Rashi saying here? What's he adding? He's adding L'chura that it's not as if you need a second stage of consent for the wall, as in their Banin Kaisel is maybe a mispis. And then later, there's a new thing. If there's a minhag, you have to build a wall. But right away from the beginning, Banin Kaisel. L'chura, that's it. Banin Kaisel Shalavonim of stone. L'chura, that's what Rashi's saying.
So he's giving a type of a wall to build, like a stone.
Well, the Mishnah goes on to say you have to build a wall, right? The Mishnah says, Banin Kaisel.
But we said before anything could be considered.
Right. That's right. But the Mishnah says, Makam Shnagol Livnei Gvil, you have to build those things, right? So it means to say, Banin Kaisel is the walls that we're presently going to say, as opposed to thinking of the statements later that come on the different types of wall as a new clause. Like you build up as a mispis, and if you want to, you have to build also a gil gazas. No, it means go straight in. Banin Kaisel, build a wall of stone, right? Because earlier we had these havaminas mispis ba'alma, right? And Rashi's, it seems like Rashi's negating those havaminas. Okay, continues the Gemara. Now, Ema, why not say, right? This is the Lishna. This is another Lishna. This is another way of learning the Gemara, of learning the Mishnah. So for the first Lishna, we introduced L'chatchila by saying Lav Shmei Hezek. And if Lav Shmei Hezek, the word Mechitza means good wall. And they wanted to build a wall, and therefore they're compelled to build a wall because there's no Shmei Hezek. When the Gemara did that, the Gemara asked, well, why not say the other way around? Why not say it means a division and Shmei Hezek? Right? And the Gemara went back and forth and saying, well, if that's the case, it should have said Lachtzais, right? It should have said the HaShutfin that wanted to split. But now that the Gemara is going the other way around, it's asking the same question, but in the inverse. Following? So the Gemara introduced first the Shmei Hezek version, that the word Mechitza means dividing property. And therefore, as soon as they want to divide property, they're compelled to build a wall because Shmei Hezek. And now the Gemara is going to introduce, well, why not learn the other way? Right? So Ema, why not say that my Mechitza, what's a Mechitza? A good wall. And the Gemara introduces the same Braisa introduced on the beginning of the Gemara to prove that the word Mechitza can mean a wall. I'm moving this a little quickly because I hope you realize it's repetitive. It's just in the inverse. Okay. So says the Gemara, what's the Raya that Mechitza can mean a wall, which is a Gudda, the word for Gudda. The Tanan, as it says in a Mishnah, Mechitza Sakerem, a wall that's surrounding a vineyard. Shenifritza, that has fell open, and it's neighboring with a guy who's got a wheat field, and therefore the guy who has the vineyard will cause his neighbor to become kalayim. Omer like dur, we tell him to rebuild the wall. Nifitza, if it again broke down, Omer like dur, we make him rebuild the wall. Nisai shemena, if the guy gave up from building the wall, the like gadra didn't build the wall. Hareza kiddush, this makes kiddush means it makes it sanctified, as in you can't touch it. It makes the wheat forbidden. And the owner of the vineyard is responsible to pay for the damages the damage he caused to the neighbor who had the wheat field because he caused it to become kilayim by failing to build the wall. All to say that the way the Mishnah uses, the way the Mishnah describes the word wall by saying mechitzas hakerem, not kaisel, not geder, but mechitzas. So you see the word mechitza means a wall. Okay, now if this is the reading of the Mishnah, that the reading of the Mishnah is, what does the word mechitza mean? Mechitza means wall. Then, time of the Ratzu, and the only reason why they're compelled to build the wall is because they agreed consensually to build the wall. Halay Ratzu, but if they didn't consent to build a wall, in Mechayv and Oisar, you would not obligate them to do that, even if they split their property. Alma, this would mean Hezek Lav Shmei Hezek. This would mean that Hezek is not a Hezek. right? So the Gemara is introducing an alternative reading, right? The Gemara began by reading that the word mechitza means let's split the property, and therefore, as soon as you want to split the property, you have to build a wall because shmei hazek. So the Gemara is suggesting, well, why not read the other way? Mechitza means a wall, and you only can build it when you want to build it, and if you don't want to build it, there's no wall because no shmei hazek. And the word mechitza can also mean wall, right? So the Gemara is doing the same thing it did before in the inverse. If I'm not clear, please stop me. Okay, says the Gemara, ihachi, if so, if the original consent is to build a wall, and that's the only reason why they're being compelled to build a wall is because they consented to do so, because there is no such thing as, there is no hazek riyah. Ihachi, if so, why is the language of the Mishnah that you should build the wall? It should have said build it, because they already consented to build a wall. The word mechitza already means wall. Right? The word mechitza already means wall. So if they said we want to build a mechitza, so you've already mentioned the word wall. So instead of saying build the wall, you say build it. Okay? So that's a raya elamai. Rather, what did you say? Plukta. That the word mechitza and the word kaisel are not the same meaning, a different meaning. And therefore, HaShutfin shiratzu lasis mechitza means they want to divide their property. And therefore, they have to build a wall against their will because of shmei hazek. Okay. Now the Gemara asks the final question that it asks on the lishon of shmei hazek, which the Gemara asked earlier. Earlier, when the Gemara asked it, the Gemara did not answer the question, and here the Gemara is going to answer the question. If so, if the word mechitza means to split the property, and that's what they wanted to do, they wanted to split the property in the moment, they wanted to split the property, they're compelled to build a wall because shmei hazek, then shiratzu lasis mechitza. Why would the Mishnah word it that they wanted to make a mechitza, which means they wanted to make a division of property? It should have said shiratzu lachtzais, they want to divide. In English, it works out too. Partners that wanted to make a division of property. Just say it more simply. Partners who wanted to divide. Right? That was the question that we asked last time that was left unanswered. But here the Gemara says, the Gemara does give an answer. The Gemara says, this is a normal phrase, the amri inchi, as people say, excuse me, tanevet plukta, let us make a partition. Let us make a split. Let us make a division. Okay, so there is apparently, I guess in ancient Aramaic and certainly in Hebrew, a common expression to say, okay, let's make a division between us. And that's why the word mechitza can be used to describe division of property. And therefore, the boinus akaisal against their will because shmei hazek. Okay, before we go forward, let's look at the Rashi. So the Gemara says like this. The Gemara suggested the other reading, right? The Gemara, this lishna, the second lishna, begins with the reading that shmei hazek, and therefore the word mechitza means a division of property. That's all they wanted was a division of property, and as soon as they want a division of property, they're compelled to build a wall. And the Gemara said, well, maybe mechitza means a wall, and the only reason why they're compelled to build a wall is because they wanted to build a wall. But otherwise, there's no reason to compel them because la shmei hazek. The Gemara said, Guda, right? Hold on a second. Yeah. The Gemara said, whoops, I keep on going to this wrong setting. Doesn't matter. Okay, so the Gemara said, Ema mechitza Guda. Maybe the word mechitza means a Guda wall, and therefore they're only building a wall because they consented to build a wall. If there's no consent to build a wall, there's no reason to force them because la shmei hazek. So it says Rashi in translating the word Guda. And here you're going to see a difference between the way he translates it here and the way he translated it the first time around. So he says, what's Guda? Koisel avonim. A wall of stone. Look at the first Rashi after the Mishnah. When the Gemara introduces the Lishna Kama, the first Lishna, which is when the Gemara L'chatchila introduced the idea that mechitza means a Guda, and therefore la shmei hazek. Says Rashi, what's a Guda? Kaisel. Here, what does Rashi say? Kaisel avonim. Don't know why, just pointing it out.
Is there like a difference? Is it a different concept, different type of, or is it the same type of concept?
Well, it's a good question because you'll have to go back to that Gemara and go through it because the Gemara there introduces hava min and mispis. The Gemara says that maybe the word mechitza actually means a mispis. which is much less than a wall of stone.
Much less than a wall. Yeah.
Mispis is just a marker, right? So there, Rashi doesn't say koisel avanim. He just says koisel. What kind of koisel? Oh, the Gemara is going to discuss later exactly what kind of koisel, because over there it's dependent on dependent on their consent, I guess. But here, Rashi is already coming at the conclusion that if you're going to read the Mishnah in its conclusive form, that lav shmei hezek, and then you're going to go on with the Mishnah which talks about minhagim, about which type of wall to make, that means they must have consented to begin with to make a wall of stone. Otherwise, why are you compelling them based on minhagim? So Rashi translates good as koisel avonim.
The link, they're both linked.
Yes.
I mean, it's like, yeah.
The first time around, the Gemara had to go through the exercise till it made a link. Whereas now the Gemara doesn't do that. The Gemara just goes to the conclusion, as it were, that if you're reading Lash Mehezek, then what they consented to is koisel avonim. Whereas the first time, he says they consented to make a gudar wall, and the Gemara had to work its way through to say that it must mean they consented to build an actual wall of stone. But over here, Gemara, maybe I'm just pointing out this little difference. Okay. And so Rashi continues that if you read the Mishnah to mean lav shmei hezek, and therefore the building of the wall is only by their consent to build a wall, and therefore b'chatzer sheish bodin chalukah, and the only consent required is the consent for building the wall, but for splitting the property, they don't need consent. Why do they not need consent? Because there's enough for 4 amas each. Yesh bodin chalukah. There's enough to give each of them a full portion of property. And therefore they can compel each other to split, to divide the property. So the only consent required is for the wall aspect. It's not for the division aspect. Okay. So Rashi is helping us contrast it to the actual lishna here, which is shmei hezek, that they wanted to consent, what they wanted to do is make a partition, is to split the property. And therefore, if you're going to read the Mishnah, lav shmei hezek, and what they wanted to do is build a wall, then that's the only thing they require consent for, is building the wall. And why do they not need consent to split the property? Because it's more than din chalukah, and they can compel each other to split the property. Okay. Says the Gemara, time of the Ratsu, and the reason why they have to build a wall, if it's lav shmei hezek, is because the chatchila, they made a t'nai, they made a condition, and they made a condition with each other that they're going to build a wall. But if they didn't want to both build the wall, you don't compel them to. What do? But you put markers. So which means, this is just interesting to note, this is something that Tosafos mentioned earlier, that even if you say lav shmei hezek, and therefore I cannot compel somebody else, my neighbor, to build a wall, I can compel him to split the cost of putting a marker to demonstrate where the property line is. That I could do. As Rashi says here, as in that you could compel a person to say, look, we divided property, I want to know where my property line ends, so you don't trespass. Right? So that they could compel each other to do. Okay. Then the Gemara goes back and says that the problem with this reading is that it should have said boinin oisai, because if the word mechitza already means a wall, and they consented to build a wall, all you have to say now is go ahead and build it, whatever it is you consented to build. Why say boinin esakaisel? So the fact that it says boinin esakaisel means that the word mechitza is not a kaisel, and if mechitza means plukta, and if mechitza means plukta, then shmei hezek. The Gemara asks, then if so, it should have said HaShutfin shiratu lachtzais, HaShutfin that wanted to divide property, as opposed to HaShutfin that wanted to make a division. So the Gemara said kedamri inchi, and now she says tilotzahu. This is an answer. I'm not sure what Rashi is coming to negate. Maybe you could have read this as a part of the question, I don't know, but he's telling us it's an answer. Okay, back to the Gemara. Okay, so all of this stuff we're all familiar with because it's the same Gemara before, just in the inverse. And the Gemara asks like this. This is the Gemara we kept on talking about. Rashi mentioned this Gemara, and the Gemara we kept on hearing about this Gemara that we're about to read now. So the line begins with the word v'i hezek re'iyah. Back to the Gemara. V'i hezek re'iyah shmei hezek, and if hezek re'iyah indeed is a hezek, ma'ira ratzu. Why does the Mishnah say that it's conditional on the fact that they wanted to split the property, even if they didn't want to even if they didn't consent to split. If one guy says, I want to split property, I can force you to split. And once I force you to split, I can force you to build a wall halfway through. It's quite a harsh deal, you know. Two guys are living like neighbors and sharing property, no problem. All of a sudden, one day, the guy doesn't like his neighbor anymore, compels him to split and compels him to spend 50% on a wall. But that's halacha. You can do it. You can't tie me down to a partnership. And now that the partnership is split, hezek reish mehezek. And therefore, the Gemara asks, this is the question that we kept on hearing, was why is it dependent on Rotzu? Why is it dependent on their consent? And here comes the answer that we kept on referring to, that Rashi told us earlier. Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Asi is in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Mishnah Seinu, our Mishnah, is referring to Keshe'ein Badin Chalukah, where there isn't enough for each to get the amount of a proper splitting, a proper division. Namely, it's not enough for 4 amas each. And Bahu, and in that case, Terotsu, it's when they want. Yeah. Yeah, Rashi says, She'em badin chalukah ches amas lo yachliku. If there's less than 8 amas, then they can't divide unless they each consent. The Gemara asks, my kamashmalan, what are you teaching us? Why write the Mishnah in such an unusual case? Why not write the Mishnah l'chatchila in a case where people have a big property and one person compels the other guy to split? Why do we have to limit it? Or not that we're limiting, it's an even. We'll see. Why are we limiting this? Why are we phrasing the case in such an awkward case where each person has less than 4 amas? My kamashmalan, what does it come to teach us? Does it come to teach us? Does it come to teach you this fact that when you have less than 4 amas each, kirotzu, if they want to palgi, they can split? Maybe that itself is the chiddush. Maybe if there's not enough for 4 amas each, then there's no splitting. You're stuck with each other. And maybe therefore the Mishnah is teaching us 2 dinim. First of all, it's teaching us the din of hezek reish mehezek. That's teaching us by telling us that the fact that it teaches us by telling us b'nei sakaiso. But it's also teaching you, by the way, that if you have less than 4 amas each, you have to both consent. And how does it teach us that law? By putting the word rotzu in there. Maybe that's what the Gemara has come to teach us. Says the Gemara, this cannot be. This couldn't be the simple reason why I put the word rotzu in, just to teach us this extra halacha, that the only way for somebody who has less than 4 amas each to split is if they both consent. That couldn't be the only reason. Why? Because Tanina, it's already been taught. There's another Mishnah which states so explicitly. A Masai, when is it that we cannot split property that has less than 4 amas? If both of them don't consent. But the moment both of them consent, even less than 4 amas each, you can divide. So the fact that people can mutually consent to split property with less than 4 amas each, we know from another Mishnah that explicitly says so. And if there's no reason for our Mishnah to add that detail to our Mishnah, our Mishnah is focused on hezek reish mehezek. Teach that, and that's taught in the words b'nei sakaiso. Why? What are you teaching us by adding the detail that b'nei sakaiso came after rotzu of mechitza, that they decided to split property, and the only way you require both of their consent to split properties when you have less than 4 amas. It could not be to teach us that din, that you require consent for less than 4 amas, because we already have a Mishnah which states so explicitly. So if so, why the Gemara? What's being added here in this detail of telling us that there's less than 4 amas and they wanted to split, and that's when, and the Gemara chooses that scenario to teach us hezek reish mehezek. And the Mishnah chooses that scenario. Says the Gemara like this: if we only had that din, that Mishnah, which stated explicitly that the only way you can split with less than 8 amas is if they both consent. Havamina, I would have thought, afilu pachas mikan, that when you have less than 4 amas each, the misbis ba'alma, you cannot compel a wall because it's so small. In other words, like this: that Mishnah only talked about division of property. And had that been the only place where we learned mutual consent for division of property, 4 amas, I would say, look, 4 amas for each person is, or 3.5 amas is so little for each person, we can't make them build a whole wall now. So yes, you can consent to split the property, but that's not, you can't make the guy build a wall. It's too much to ask of him. He already has a tiny property. Now you're making him build a wall on top of it. And therefore, kamash malon hacha, therefore our Mishnah comes and says, Kaisel, you have to build a wall. So this gets to what we were saying before, that the reason why the Gemara, the Mishnah uses the case of Ratzu, and the Mishnah uses a case where they each have less than 4 amas and they consent, is to tell you that even when they're left with a tiny little property, we can still compel them to build a wall. Because had it just been up to the din of the Mishnah there, which says that if they consent, they can split even less than 4, I may not have gone so far as to push them and say, then I have to build a wall. It's such a tiny property. Nebuch, that guy's going to lose half his property now on the wall. So comes our Mishnah and says that even if it's nothing, even if it's only 2 amas each, and that's why it says Rotzu, even then, Hezek Riyesh Mehezek, and you have to build a wall. Okay, clear? Pretty straightforward, I think. Says the Gemara, if so, the Lisniha, teach us our Mishnah, V'loy Lisnihach. Don't tell us the other Mishnah. In other words, the other Mishnah which explicitly stated that you require consent of both parties when you have less than 4 amas, that's already been incorporated in our Mishnah. Okay, we understand that you need to say it in our Mishnah because you want to teach us in our Mishnah that even when you have such tiny properties, still Shmei Hazek, and therefore you can still compel to build a wall. But by the by, you're also already taught that you require consent when there's less than 4 amas. And therefore there's no reason to then say it explicitly later. Meaning we understand that there's a detail our Mishnah adds that the other Mishnah which says it explicitly doesn't have. Because the Mishnah that states it explicitly only has the din that we require consent to split when there's less than 4 amas each. And our Mishnah has the added din that even when it's a tiny property, you have to build a wall because it has a kriya. But our Mishnah, by telling you that when you even have less than 4 amas, you need to build a wall, also teaches you that you have to be consenting because it says Rotzi. So the explicit Mishnah is no longer required because it's already incorporated in our Mishnah. Clear? Answers the Gemara, you're right. But Sefer Itzrachalei. The only reason why the Gemara there stated explicitly that you need consent when you're splitting a property of 4 amas, of less than 4 amas each, even though we already know from our Mishnah. But the reason why the reason why the Mishnah repeats itself over there explicitly is as a lead up to the second half of the Mishnah there. Where there it says, the Kisvei Kodesh, that if 2 people share ownership in Holy Scripture, even if they both consent to cut the Scripture in half, I'll take the first 5 chapters, you take the second 5 chapters, you don't split it up because it's not respectful to the Scripture. This is the Gemara. Let's read Rashi before we go forward. So there's not much Rashi here because all this stuff has been explained, at least for the most part, in the previous Gemara. So it says Rashi like this, B'kisvei Kodesh, just it's the only Rashi we have here, is Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah is considered Scripture. Shu b'krach echad, that's in one scroll. V'chein likewise Nevi'im v'ksuvim. The same thing is true of writings and prophets, all of Tanakh. Haksuvim begilin Sefer Torah, if they're written in a scroll like a Sefer Torah, which means, it seems from Rashi, that a book like this, if you and I had it in partnership, we can mutually consent to split. I take the Marsha and onward, and you take the Marsha and backwards, or something like that. Rashi seems to be saying it's only if it's written in a scroll. A. B. He also says it's limited to Tanakh. It's not respectful when it's written in that form. I'm sure when we learn the Mishnah then, we'll get much more details in the Rishonim. But just in the Rashi here, it seems like it's 2 conditions to prevent partners from splitting a scroll. A, it's Scripture, Tanakh, and B, it's got to be written in a scroll, not in a book. Or let's say if we had a Chamisha Chumsha Torah, we can mutually split. I'll take Baresh Shmois, you take Vayikra B'Midbar Devarim, or something like that. All right. Now let's go back to the Gemara. What we're going to do is we're going to skip the parentheses here. Because it seems quite clear that both Rashi and Tosafos did not have this parentheses in their Gemara. First of all, there's no comment from Rashi on it. And number 2, one of the questions addressed in this parentheses, Tosafos mentioned in an earlier page, and if you remember this, he asked a question, he gave an answer, and then he concluded and said that there are some versions of the Gemara that actually have this question and answer in the text. Yeah? That version of the Gemara he's referring to is the parentheses, as we'll see. So it's much easier to learn Rashi and Tosafos, especially Tosafos, if we skip the parentheses for now, go to the Gemara and see it as Rashi and Tosafos themselves saw it, and then we'll go back to the parentheses and see the new details that parentheses adds. Okay?
You were just saying that the parentheses were not there when Rashi.
It seems like it wasn't there when Rashi and Tosafos had the Gemara. It's quite clear. You can see from Marshall also. There's a discussion in some of the Achronim about this, but it seems that first of all, there's no comment from Rashi on it. And sorry.
No, I'm just saying like parentheses added to the Gemara after, like it's kind of weird, like it's strange.
Okay, so, the Gemara. Well, it means there was two versions of the Gemara.
Yeah.
And wherever Rashi and Tosafos were learning, but Tosafos is aware of it, right? Tosafos says that there are those Gemaras that have this question and answer actually in their text, which means Tosafos is saying that I know there's another version of the Gemara that has a different text, right?
It's the first time I see parentheses in the Gemara. That's why.
There are sometimes parentheses in the Gemara, sometimes square brackets, sometimes round brackets. And generally speaking, square brackets is meant to be in, and round brackets you can leave out. Not always, but sometimes. But anyway, over here, the parentheses opens up with Lishna Achrina, meaning there's another version to this Gemara that's read this way. So obviously the editors of this daf at some point in history had both these versions in front of them, and they put one in parentheses.
Interesting.
I don't know why they put one in parentheses either. I assume they did this for the same reason that I'm skipping it now, because Rashi and Tosafos clearly didn't have it. So they put this one in parentheses. But it's going to be easier to understand Tosafos if we skip the parentheses first and then go back to it afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see after the parentheses. I want to ask it this. The Mayu Kimtel Masnisan, the She'ein Badin Chalukah. Why did you now settle this Mishnah that is talking about a situation where there's less than 4 amas each? And therefore, She'ein Badin Chalukah, if that's the case, that you're saying that there's less than din chalukah each, there's less than 4 amas each, kiratzu, if they both wanted to split, my hava, so what happens? Now it's all of a sudden compelled? Nahadrabu, let them retract. I consented to splitting the property, and then I find out this whole thing that I have to spend all this money and space on the wall. I say I take back. Let's take a shed. Right? This is another one of the questions that kept on coming up in the Rashis and the Tosafos that we learned earlier. Kiratzu my hava, like if they consented. So back out. What's the big deal? Says the Gemara, Omer Abasi Rabbi Yochanan, Abasi says in Rabbi Yochanan, Shekonu miyodan. They made a kinyan with each other. They shook each other's hands and they said, we're going to do it. They pledged to do it. The Gemara asks further, V'chikonu miyodan. And if they pledge to do it with each other, my hava, so what happens? Who cares? They have a kinyan dvar ba'alma. A kinyan dvar ba'almahu. It's only a kinyan of words. It has no real legal binding effect. Right? There's no, all acquisition in Torah, all kinyan must have what they call a chalois. Means it has to have some sort of something that the kinyan takes effect on. So, for example, when you do the ksuba, you do what's called a kinyan agav siddur, right? Because the entire ksuba is, what's the ksuba? The ksuba is 2 witnesses are testifying that Mr. So-and-so, Levi knew, pledged to provide XYZ to his wife. That's what it is. It's a document. The ksuba is like the text of the ksuba is the Adam speaking, the witness is speaking. The witnesses say, on this and this date, and this place, we saw so-and-so accept upon himself to do so-and-so for so-and-so, etc., etc. Right? So the witnesses are speaking and saying what I pledged to do. When did I pledge to do it? But because I said so? That's not a kinyan. I have to have some kinyan, which they had witnessed, and they said, oh, we saw Levi knew make a kinyan, and through that kinyan, he pledged to do so-and-so.
Is that why he lifts the...
Correct. And that's why he lifts up the thing.
Like the kippah.
That's right.
Or
Lifts up the yarmulke, lifts up the gartel, lifts up something. It's called kinyan agav sudar. It's a kinyan that's happening. The kinyan of my promise is being taken effect by the act of sudar. Is like, I think means a cloth. I think that's what sudar means. On the cloth. By the act of me raising this cloth, I am now taking it upon myself to do all that's written in the ksuba. And that's what the witnesses are signing, that they saw this pledge happen because I raised this thing. All to say that kinyan dvarim, when I say I'm going to do something, it's nothing. I'm not obliged, halachically speaking. You can see this explicitly in the Mukha Yosef. I'm not obliged, halachically speaking, if I promise to give you X amount of dollars, I'm not obliged to give it to you. Not by kinyan. Maybe for other reasons, if I articulate it as a vow, then there's a problem of keeping a neder. But there's no kinyan that now you own that money, right? Because words are not a kinyan. I have to do an act. So over here, what happened? The two guys shook hands, and they said they promised me something. Okay, so they promised me something. Go back out. It's kinyan dvarim. So they need to have some action of kinyan. So says the Gemara. They acquired it from each other by each going into one side. So by each going into one side and designating, this is my side, so that's a kind of acquisition. I'm taking hold of a certain piece of property, excluding you from that side of the property, and you're doing the same thing on your side. You're going to your side of the property, excluding me from my side of the property, and in this way the kinyan happens. We're going to see Rashi exactly what this is. Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi adds a detail. Going, for example, this guy went into his side, and made a chazaka there. He did an act. And the other guy went to his side, and did an act, and did a chazaka. So the three stages here the Gemara is identifying. Let's know these three stages, so you can understand what's going on. Stage number one is kinyan dvarim. They just pledge by words. That, says the Gemara, useless. Doesn't help. You can back out. Stage number two is a kinyan of taking sides. I went to my side, you went to your side. And stage number three is a kinyan via chazaka. A kinyan via chazaka. Yeah, so let's see what these three stages are. Let's see Rashi. So says Rashi. First, kinyan dvarim ba'almo. What's kinyan dvarim? The ein chalipin koinen ela davar hanikna oy mecher oy matana oy shibir kakois shakinyan chalov oy metatlin. So I think what he's trying to say is there's another kind of kinyan called kinyan chalipin. Kinyan chalipin means, where we exchange something. It's basically bartering. Chalipin is bartering. I give you a watch, and you give me a hat instead. It's bartering. Chalipin. That's what chalipin is. So it would seem like Rashi is saying, why isn't the kinyan dvarim a chalipin? In exchange for your side, I'm taking my side, or something like that. But says Rashi, in other words, because that's what this would be. What's the exchange happening here when we split property, right? What's the exchange? The Gemoro is saying that there is a kinyan, but the kinyan is a kinyan dvarim, right? So what's the kinyan of kinyan dvarim, right? If we just say we're splitting property, it's not a kinyan. It's a statement. So what's a kinyan? What's the exchange? Okay, so maybe I'm exchanging my side for your side, right? I'm exchanging the rights I have to your side of the property for exclusive rights on my side of the property, right? So, but exchange, says Rashi, can't happen unless there's an act unless there's a thing upon which the act is, unless there's an item upon which the exchange is happening. And over here, the exchange is only happening in words, not happening on any thing on the ground. No physical thing that's upon which this exchange is taking place. That's what Rashi seems to be saying. That chalipin, this exchange is not kaina unless a davar nikna, on some object, a mecher, being sold, matana, or a gift, a shibir karkois, or I'm giving you in exchange for one property, another property, or something like that, upon which this is being chal. I'm not 100% clear on this, Rashi.
This is not shibir karkois?
No, because we always had kinyan on the whole thing. I was a shuttif. Right, so we always had kinyan on the whole thing. So what's my kinyan chal on? On this property, I already had it. right? It's only in the fact that you're stopping to be in my side. And I'm stopping to be on your side. That's what I think the problem is. I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is the right. I think. Yeah. That's what Rabbi Hananel has a little bit more elaborate, but that's basically the idea. Right? Kinyan Chalip in exchange works when there's an object that's moving from one place to another. A gift, an exchange of property. Property went from my possession to your possession, or something like that. But over here, where's the exchange of possession? Where's the exchange of property? There is no exchange of property. We're splitting property. Right? So where's the acquisition? Where's the act of acquisition? Right? There's no exchange of anything. I'm retaining what I always had. I'm just losing half of it. Right? That's the inherent conundrum here of this kinyan, because there's no exchange. Nothing is being passed from one person to the other. That's why it's not shibud karkois. Okay, so but then the stage two. Stage two, the Gemara said this is who said this? No, it doesn't say who said it, but this is the stage two, where there's a kinyan before chazaka. And the kinyan, the Gemara says, kanu beruchais. They acquired it by taking sides. So says Rashi, what happened here? What happened here that's not just verbal agreement to split property? Says Rashi, this guy selects for himself the eastern side. And this guy selects himself the western side. And then they made the kinyan verbally. Umeata. And now, niknachelek mizrachi lazeh, the eastern side is acquired by this one. The aim lazeh chelek boy, and the other guy does not have any portion in it. Right? Because I mentioned before, what changed? I always had rights. What changed is you have no rights to my side, and I have no rights to your side. So how does this kinyan go down? And why is it not a kinyan dvarim anymore? Because before we did kinyan dvarim, before we did the kinyan, before we acknowledged we're going to split, we each took a side. In the first model, why am I compelled to split with you? Because we're sitting in an office, miles away from the actual property, and we agreed to split. And here there's no kinyan, right? Because it's just an agreement to split property. There's no action taken on any object. But now there is an action taken on an object. I go onto my side, and before we've agreed to split, I say I'm stationing myself here, and you say you're stationing yourself there. And then after we make the station, after we've each positioned ourselves on our side, then we agree to split. And in that moment, because I'm already on this side, now that side is nicknate to me. And because it's nicknate to me, you have no right to enter. It's a very subtle vart. But the vart is that I've taken the property before the kinyan dvarim. When there's only kinyan dvarim, there's no object upon which the kinyan happens. Because what's the object upon which the kinyan is happening? We already own this. Now we're just splitting it. But now that I've taken a side and you've taken your side, so now there's something that the kinyan is falling on. What's the kinyan falling on? That I have full right to the western side and you can't enter that western side. That's only if I've selected western side before the kinyan. If I select the western side after kinyan, then the kinyan didn't fall on anything because I didn't have anything to make the kinyan fall on. So I have to first select my side and then make the kinyan. And then the kinyan suffices to say two things. Rashi says, first of all, it's nikna to me. And what happens when it's nikna to me? The other guy's not allowed to come in. Because I already had selected my side before the kinyan started. This seems to be what's happening here. It's a question of partial order. If we decide to split first, and then we'll say we'll work out the details of which side we're going to take later, then the moment that we agreed to split was nothing, was just words. I didn't do anything. But if I select my side first, and then I say that we're going to split, so now I have something for those words to settle on. The words are settling on the side that I split, that I chose. And therefore that's mine, and you can't enter. That's stage two. So kinyan dvarim was, we agreed to split. Nothing, no act or no object upon which those words can fall. Number two is where I took a side, and now when we decide to split, it does have a chalois. It could land on something. It lands on the property that I chose before. and likewise that you chose before. Stage 3, which Rashi introduced. Rashi added and said, Kagoin, Shahala Zabasai Shalai Vihzigzeh. Each one did a chazaka. So not just a kinyan beruchais, not just kinyan dvarim, certainly not. And not just kinyan beruchais, where we each took a side before we decide to split, and therefore the chalois happens on that side. But hirzigba. How was I machzik? What kind of chazaka did I do? Says Rashi. The hirzik bechelkai, each one went and made a chazaka on his property. Rofak Bey Porta, he plowed a tiny little bit. He plowed a little bit. So I didn't act on the property. Bahakarka niknech b'chazaka, property is acquired when I do a chazaka. After you consented at the moment of the splitting. What is this Rashi saying here? L'chura, what Rashi is saying is like this. Ordinarily, a chazaka takes time to acquire, right? If I have property and someone starts to plow my field, he doesn't own it automatically just because he's doing some action of plowing. It takes a certain amount of years of him plowing and me not protesting that I can say that he can lay claim to it. A certain amount of time. But because there was a consent before, right? There's consent to split. And because there was consent to split, therefore the moment to take an act, instantaneously I made a chazaka. Because the only reason why the chazaka takes all this time beforehand is because the other person's protesting, right? Why does chazaka, like for example, the chazaka of squatters takes 3 years. Why does it take so long? Because we have to wait for the owner to give up on protesting. So long as he's still protesting, someone living in his property, the other guy doesn't get a chazaka. But over here, the protest is gone. You've already agreed to give me half the property. We've already agreed to split. So as soon as the protest is gone because we agreed to split, that moment I do a chazaka, now I own it. Okay, now I'm going to put this out there for you to think about, because we're going to see in Tosafos how he learns a little bit differently. I'm going to put this out there. Does this chazaka happen after kinyan dvarim or after kinyan beruchos? When does it happen? Right? There's 3 stages. I don't know the answer. I'm just telling you. We're going to see from Tosafos. He's going to address this. We're going to go to that Tosafos first, and then when next week we go to the parentheses, then we'll do the other Tosafos that were before. But I want to do this Tosafos first, just to get to, because we're in this sugya right now, just to finish up this discussion. But just something to think about. Does this kinyan, is it Rashi, which said kagoin shehechzigba? Is that only true after kanu beruchos, or is it another option? Kinyan dvarim for sure not, and you have 2 options: kinyan beruchos or chazaka. Is that one way of learning the Gemara, or is it no? Or is it Rav Ashi is giving an added layer after you've already done kinyan beruchos? Meaning to say, if we make a decision, if we agree to split, it's a kinyan dvarim, there was no act done, and then you go and plow in your side of the field, were you machzik now? You now own the property. Or can I take it back now because there's only kinyan dvarim? The pashtos, right, you would say, it's a different option, right? The Chori would say it is a chazaka, why not? Right? I'm not protesting because I said we're going to do it. Or you can say, 1 second, your word was nothing because it's the only kinyan dvarim. You can go both ways. Just something to think about. So let's see Tosafos.
What's an example of chazaka?
Classic example of chazaka is I squat in your house for 3 years and you don't kick me out, and you never protest. So I own it. I get rights to it. It's a law of squatters, but there's all kinds of chazaka. It's the same thing. It's precedent. I have precedent that I've been here for X amount of time. Right? After a certain amount of years, you don't have to show the deed to your home. As long as you can show proof of residence for the last X amount of years, it's yours.
Cheers.
Right? You've been there for long enough. So here I'm doing an act to prove that it's mine because I plowed on that field. I plowed a little bit in the field. And that's me saying that I'm here. And Rashi's telling us that because they've already consented, therefore it happens right away. Now I'm asking, just keep this in mind. Does this chazaka happen after kinyan dvarim or dafka after kinyan beruchos? Something to think about. Let's see Tosafos, and then maybe we'll come back to the Rashi afterwards. So we're looking at the Rashi, the Tosafos, which is the Rashi Amar Kagon Shahalach. Yeah. So we're doing the 4th Tosafos. the first three Tosafos I'm going to come back to them, Hashem, next week when we do the parentheses. Or actually, before we do the parentheses. I don't know if we'll do the third one. We'll for sure do the first two. So let's see this fourth Tosafos. So Tosafos quotes the Gemoro, which is Rashi Omer Kohen Shahalach. Rashi says that what kind of kinyan did they do? They each made a chazaka. So Taimel the Ri is curious. It's the following question. Ma bar Rashi lahoisef. What's Rashi adding b'chal? Do I need to be told the chazaka mayalas, the chazaka works, kamay kinyan, just like a kinyan? Chazaka and kinyan are the same thing. What's he adding b'chal? Kinyan works, so does chazaka work. Rashi is adding all a chiddush din that you can make a chazaka. You've already said that kinyan works. That's enough. It's such an interesting question. Anyway, she said, but that's the question Tosafos asks. What's the chiddush of saying that chazaka works? We know already. Certainly it works just like a kinyan. So near the Ri, says the Ri, this is what Rashi is coming to add. That even though the Gemara says later in Cheskes Habatim, Shaloi b'fanav, that if the two are not in front of each other, right? In other words, if I'm not watching you make the chazaka, then sarach lememar lei lech chazek. I have to go. In other words, if I'm selling you a property, and your kinyan is going to come at the moment of chazaka, but I'm not going to be there to watch you do the chazaka. So I actually have to verbalize and say, lei chazek, go make a kinyan, go make a chazaka. I think that's the case. I think the case is where he sold property. Yeah, it's a gift. It's some sort of chazaka that one person is acquiescing that you can take the property. But if I'm not going to be there to watch you make the chazaka, I have to say le chazek, go and do the chazaka. The kani, and in that way own it, acquire it. But so that's usually the halacha. Usually the halacha is the owner has to watch the person make the chazaka, not protest, and that's the way the chazaka makes the kinyan. But in our case, because the first one said, you take the northern side. And I'll take the southern side. And one of them went along and made a chazaka. Or call echad b'shalai. Each one of them made a chazaka. Each one of them dug a little bit. Shalai b'fnei zeh. This one not in front of the other. They didn't see each other do it. It's as if they did a kinyan beruches. Even they didn't tell each other to go make the chazaka. So this is the scenario in Tosafos. They're sitting in an office building somewhere, and they decide they're splitting the property. So they say to each other, okay, you take the north, I'm taking the south. Yeah? So there's kinyan dvarim at this moment. There's no kinyan at all. Now, so at this moment, they can retract. But then they each walked off, and this guy made a chazaka on the southern side, and this guy made a chazaka on the northern side. And they didn't see each other make the chazaka. But because this chazaka came after their consent, it's kind of just like a kinyan beruches. So in Tosafos, what's clearly, Rav Ashi is giving another option to kinyan beruches. It's not that it comes after kinyan beruches. Even after kinyan dvarim ba'alma, it works. And that's the chiddush of Rashi here. That even though it comes after kinyan dvarim ba'alma, because we only verbally consented to split the property, but because there was consent, and I said you take this side and I'm going to take that side, yeah. Therefore, the moment I'm machzik, even though you're not there to watch me, I'm kind of. So it's another option: either kinyan beruches or kinyan chazaka. Yeah. Let's go back to Rashi then. Let's see if we can settle how Rashi would learn. Now that we see the stages in Tosafos. So there's a word in Rashi which the Haggah, I don't know if you guys have Haggahs Vitziunim, changes, and this might be a game changer. So let's see in Rashi. So v'hichzik, Each one went to made a chazaka. The chelkoi in his property, Rafuk Bey Porta, he plowed a little bit. That's his chazaka. The karka nikne b'chazaka, property can be acquired through chazaka. Acharei asher ratzu, after each of them consented. But when did they consent? Says Rashi. B'shas chalukah, at the time of the division. What's this division? Kinyan dvarim or kinyan beruchos? Right? After they agreed, after they consented at the time of division. When was this division? So you could learn that he's learning like Tosafos. The time of Chalukah happened earlier. Kinyan dvarim. And because they agreed earlier, therefore it happens right away when they do the chazaka. But do you guys have a little test there? A little test in the Rashi next to the word chalukah? If you do, okay, it's not goes with Tzionim. They tell you to look at the Rashi that's on the Rif. Right? The Rif is like the collection of all the halachic parts of the Gemara. It cuts out all the parts that are not halachic, and that's how you know how the Rif paskins. And there's an early Rishon who took the Rashis relevant to the sections of the Rif that the Rif cut out and put them on the Rif's page. So a lot of times you look at the Rashi there and you see it's a little different than the way Rashi has here, and you can kind of try to authenticate them. So the Rashi on the Rif doesn't have the word chalukah, but the word chazaka. Chazaka. So now watch it. Ba'karka nikne b'chazaka, property is acquired b'chazaka achar sharatzu, after they consented b'shas chazaka, at the moment of chazaka. If that's the pshat, if that's the right reading of Rashi, then when does the consent happen? At the moment of chazaka. The pash, when is that? The pash is when the guy's actually digging in the field. So that's exactly the opposite of Tosafos. Tosafos is saying that the chiddush of Rashi is that even if I'm not there, I can dig and get the chazaka because you consented earlier. But if Rashi is saying b'shas chazaka, then that means I have to be there watching you do the chazaka. And if I'm watching you do the chazaka, then I certainly do not need kinyan beruchos. Certainly not. Right? Because your mamish watching the guy make a chazaka. The last piece of the puzzle that's still somewhat bothering me a little bit is, well, not really actually. Not really actually. Yeah. Okay. So at least we have now the full picture of the halacha that hezek reish mehezek, and the kanu miyadam, and the fact that it says ratzu is not on the wall because that's against their will because hezek reish mehezek. The fact that there's ratzu is because they have to agree to split the property because it's less than 4 amos each. And the fact that they want to split the property is not enough. They have to have some sort of kinyan, either a kinyan or a chazaka. This is essentially where we are right now. And Mitzvah Shem next week, we're going to look at this parentheses. Where some new details are going to emerge in this discussion.
Kinyan beruchos.
Yeah.
Rashi says that they are boirer, each one his side.
Before, yeah.
So does that mean it's the dibor? They just agree as
yes, the dibor.
So they're not actually there.
Okay, let's say they're not there. Yeah.
Okay. Whereas like the chazaka, it sounds like they're physically present on the grounds.
Yeah. The question is, does the other guy have to be there when I'm making my chazaka? Does the other guy have to be there and watch me? Rashi, Tosafos is saying the chiddush is not. But in Rashi, if the last word of that Rashi is b'shas chazaka, then it seems like you have to have the other guy has to actually be there. And it seems like that's the correct reading of Rashi, considering that it's in the Rif Rashi, and the footnote here they say that in the earliest prints that's the way it is, which means you have to be there actually when I do the chazaka. But kinyan beruches, the word of kinyan beruches is that we've made a decision which side we're going to take before we agreed. And therefore, at the moment of agreement, there is some sort of property upon which that agreement can be chal because we've chosen which side it's going to be.
We've laid out the details in advance.
Yes, exactly. The details of which side we're going to take before, and that way, there's a side upon which the kinyan is happening. But it's interesting how Rashi phrases that kinyan. The kinyan is phrased as, I take my side and you have no more right in it. Because I had the side before. What changed? What changed is that you no longer come on my side. Right?
Right.
Now there's a kinyan. It becomes exclusively mine. But it's only if, again, as you said, we put the details before. Okay, so we'll stop over here. And Mitzvah Shem next week, we're going to look at the first two Tosafos and this parentheses. And then Mitzvah Shem will go right there until the next sugya of Gazas and Gvil and all that.
Good.
Okay, good night.
Yeah.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos and good night and good Chodesh.
Good Chodesh.